All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Oasis Community Church tonight. And we're going to do something. First of all, I want to celebrate the last 4 weeks where we've had guest speakers. They've all done just an amazing job. And it's been great to hear from other people within the church teach. And I've really enjoyed that. And as we look forward, you're going to be starting a new series next week through the summer on Colossians called Rooted, right? Okay. So be sure and join us for that. Tonight, we were, and if you want to go ahead and pull up the slide, Greg. Tonight, based on yesterday's tragedies, I was going to be speaking tonight on the story of the Bible. And after what happened yesterday, and as the news went on throughout the day, and it just kept getting worse and worse, I called Tim and asked him if we could change what we were doing. And I wanted him to join me up here as we talk through really the question that we see all over social media that we're all asking ourselves, and that is, why does God allow tragedies like that to happen? You know, too many times churches bury their head in the sand when something like this happens. They try to avoid it, hope it goes away quickly, and move on so they don't have to answer these tough questions. But I think we owe it to each other as Christians. We owe it to each other as leaders. And you guys need to hear from our leader on something, on a topic like this. And it's the reason I asked him to join me tonight as we talk about this. And there's going to be a lot of things as we go through, and we're going to open up to questions at the end. When it comes to the sovereignty of God, there are some things I have to admit I'm going to be saying I don't know. Because if I could understand God at using 10% of my brain, he's not much of a God. But we can, as we talk through a lot of these things, and as we go through John chapter 11, we see Jesus says, hey, if you know me, you know the Father. If you see me, you know the Father. And we're gonna look at his experience with Lazarus, and I think we can see a lot of ways that answer this why question.
I was going to say, you sent me a little bit of idea about your notes and stuff like that, and I reviewed them. And outside of the story of Joseph in the Old Testament, I can't think of a better passage to address the issue of why. And perhaps this one is actually better than Joseph because there's so much more revelation that's in the story of the death of Lazarus and Jesus being intentional about not arriving early.
Right. Actually saying and on purpose allowing the tragedy to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
And for a specific reason in that case, but it also shares his heart for things that he doesn't purposely allow to happen. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I put that in quotes.
Yeah.
I'll throw this question out to you. What do you think has changed in our society and in our culture that has put us in this position where these tragedies have become commonplace?
Well, anytime you dismiss God from a society, this occurs. If you read Romans chapter 1, it is today's news. And the scriptures are pretty clear that the judgment of God, in some respects, is already on our society. And it's evidenced by the behavior that is normalized in our society. And the Bible says that because they did not worship the Creator as such, but worship the creature, not necessarily the elephant and the giraffe, but ourselves. We exalt ourselves, and therefore God says, I turn you over to yourself.
Mm-hmm. When I look at our culture today, I also look back, and if you study ancient religions, and you go back to the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Canaanites, the Egyptians, we have come full circle back where we're almost have adopted the polytheistic views that they did. And I'll tell you what I mean with that. Let me explain. Back then, they believed that you were created as an afterthought, not in the image of God, as an afterthought. You were there as a servant to the gods to take care of the tasks.
And had to constantly appease them because they were bipolar.
Right, they were. They were very, very unstable.
Right.
You were not there by design. You didn't have a purpose. And there was no afterlife.
Right.
There was an afterlife for the gods, and there was an afterlife for the rulers, but for the common person, there was no afterlife. So there was really no hope.
Exactly.
And you look at what we teach today and where our culture has turned, we've ignored the Imago Dei. We say you're created by chance.
Right.
You're a slave to your DNA. I mean, instead of a slave to a God, we've just turned it into you're a slave to your DNA. There is no purpose or design in what you do.
Yes.
and there is no afterlife. Just when it's over, it's over. And so it's no wonder people like the gentleman yesterday, the young man yesterday, or the young man last week in Buffalo, if there's no value on your life, there's no value placed on anyone else's either.
You've nailed it, because, you know, this is in contradiction. The way we behave and live out our lives is in contradiction to the natural law that God has placed within us. And the first principle, or the first law of natural law that God has put in every person, is life. And if I don't deem my life as valuable, then I'm surely not going to deem yours as valuable. If I am a servant or a slave to my own passions and how I feel at any given moment, if I want to walk into a school and kill children, I'm going to do it, because ultimately none of it matters.
Exactly. You know, and when I think about us as Christians as well, I think, in our view of God and how we have changed culturally how we view God is also at fault here. And I'll explain why. First of all, I think we look at God as an ATM machine. You and I talked about this earlier today.
Right.
When we want something, we go to the ATM machine, we pull out a favor, and we expect God and that favor to be there, and we move on. We don't, and sometimes we might deposit something in just to make sure there's something there for next time. But we use them like an ATM machine. And the other thing I think is
the Catholic Church, I think, uses the term indulgences.
Yes. Didn't Martin Luther?
I think there was a piece of paper nailed on a door.
Yeah, something to do with that a few years ago. Yeah,
somewhere.
95 of them. Yeah.
Yeah, actually 95. Yeah. Got him in trouble, but go ahead.
You know, the other thing I think is, as Christians, I think a lot of times because we do look at God as an ATM, we minimize the evil in us.
Yes.
And maximize the evil that happens in the world. Evil is evil in God's eyes.
Period.
And I think we minimize what happens in us, because if you think about it, if you follow this to its logical conclusion, take it out as far as you can, really the question should be, why does God allow me to exist? If we're asking, why does God allow evil to exist? Why does God allow me to exist? Why hasn't he done something about me?
Right, absolutely. You know, I think about that. When I was younger, I worked on a double major at Ouachita Baptist University. One was in religion and the other was in sociology. And I remember when Dr. White in sociology walked to the board the very first time in the classroom, he walks up, it doesn't say a word, and he writes on the board, mercy for me, justice for them.
Exactly. And that's how
exactly
we as Christians have acted. And I think we still act to this day. You know, the other thing I think that we don't look at and don't talk about in churches, because it's looking in a mirror, is where were we in the lives of these kids these last 2 weeks?
Right.
You look at these kids, and we read today, and you and I were talking about the gentleman, I hate to say gentleman, the young man down in Uvalde. The last few weeks had been cutting himself. He had been throwing rocks, shooting BB guns at people, harassing people. And that sounds like a similar story we've heard in the Bible, doesn't it?
Yeah, Mark chapter 5, where there's a man who's a demoniac. He's possessed with demons. And I think that's a great thing to remember. We oftentimes want to associate these things with a lot of other things. It's clear to me that this has a lot to do with demonic activity, the way he's cutting himself, the way he's reacting. And ultimately, when you kill, 14 children? 19 children, 2 adults, or whatever. When that happens, that is far more than just a mental breakdown. And I think that we are seeing an escalation of that in our society, because as people are turned over to a reprobate mind, if Christ is not there, and I might add this, if Christ is not Lord, then we're capable of all types of evil. And this is only the surface.
As a pastor with 35 years plus experience, how would you answer if somebody came to you and said, why, I'm putting you on the spot here, why does God allow these tragedies to happen?
Sure. You know, I usually defer this to Roy, and so he'll be coming up here in just a second. You know, I think honestly, and this is something very, very important if you have a pen and a piece of paper and you're taking notes, and I hope that you are. I think all of this has to begin with a fundamental understanding of God and God's sovereignty. God's sovereignty is what we're talking about here. Let me read out of the 3rd chapter of the Westminster Confession, okay? And I believe this is such a great statement. It says, quote, God from all eternity did by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will, freely and immutably ordained whatsoever comes to pass. And then there's a semicolon. And I want to just kind of throw that out there again. How many of you agree with the statement? God from all eternity did, by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will, freely and immutably. By the way, what does immutable mean? Unchanging. Freely and unchanging ordain whatsoever comes to pass. Just curious, take a poll here. How many of you agree with that? Okay. All right. Let me ask a second question. How many of you would consider yourself to be an atheist? Theism has at its core the fact that God is sovereign. Now, let me ask you a question. Is there anything in the universe outside of God's sovereignty? How many of you say, yes, there are things outside of God's sovereignty? How many of you say, no, there's nothing outside of God's sovereignty? Well, the answer is there's nothing. Nothing outside of his sovereign will. Either God is sovereign or he is not. The reason I state that is because the difference between a theist, which is what we profess to be, and an atheist, primarily, is that we believe that God rules over everything. R.C. Sproul uses this terminology. He says, there are no maverick molecules in the universe. If there is a maverick molecule, let me tell you how serious I am about this, and the Bible, by the way. If there is a single maverick molecule in the universe outside of God's sovereignty, then you can't trust a promise of God. Because that means there's something else out there that God is not in control of, that God has no power over, that God cannot legislate. There is absolutely nothing in the universe that is not under the sovereignty of God. Now, let me continue with the statement. It says again, God from all eternity did, by most wise and holy counsel of his own will, freely and immutably ordain whatsoever comes to pass, that though God ordains whatsoever comes to pass, yet he does it in such a way as thereby neither is God the author of sin, nor is violence offered to the will of the creatures, nor to the nature of man or nature. Whenever we talk about that God ordains things, what do we mean? Let me try to break it down in this way. I don't want to consume all your time.
No, you're good.
But let me break it down this way. Is there anything that God does not know? Is there anything in the future that God does not know? When God created everything, and even before God created everything, was there something that he did not know? Was he surprised with anything? No. God knew everything. From before he created and said, let there be light, he already had a knowledge of what? Everything. Everything. And when we say that God ordains things, we're not necessarily saying that God comes down to the planet and he forces behavior. But under his sovereignty, he chooses to allow certain things. Now, when we say allow, that's important. Because God allowing something, he still maintains his sovereignty. When did God know about yesterday? Before time and space ever existed. Before he ever formed Adam of the dust of the ground, God was fully aware of that. And in his sovereignty, he did not force this young man to participate in this, perpetuate it. But God in his sovereignty, for his own purposes, what? allowed it to happen. There's the friction. There's the paradox, Mike. There's the rub where we have to balance the sovereignty of God and human responsibility. I'll stop there and let you jump in.
We talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
It's when his sovereignty meets our everyday life in the evil in us,
Right.
no matter how great or how small, that's where the tension is.
Absolutely.
And that tension is where really we learn more about him and his sovereignty than ever before.
Absolutely.
He could have easily wiped out evil.
Exactly.
But what he does, rather than do that, he wants to work with the evil in us and remove the evil from us.
Absolutely.
Rather than do away with evil as a whole.
Absolutely. The sovereignty of God, and if you're taking notes, write this down. The sovereignty of God always works for ultimate good, even in the bad. If we don't believe that, let's throw out Romans 8:28. But all things, does that include that? I looked up the Greek word all. All things, all things, all things. God, in his sovereignty, what he ordains, what he allows, will all ultimately work out for good. Everything will work out for good and for his glory. The problem is I don't see it today. I don't see it in that circumstance. But when we get to heaven, we will rejoice and celebrate the magnificence of our God and his sovereignty, who is able to do something outstanding even with that evil. And if he can't, then let's lock the doors.
I think this is a good segue into John chapter 11.
Perfect.
Because in the story of Lazarus, it starts off in the end of chapter 24, where his disciples are asking, "Are you truly the Messiah?" They've been following him for 3.5, 4 years. They've seen all the miracles he's done. They've heard his teachings, and yet they're still asking him, "Are you really the Messiah?"
Right.
And so around this time, he gets a call or gets a message.
Right.
They didn't have smartphones back then, but he didn't get a text message or a call. But he got a message that his friend Lazarus had died or was sick at the time.
Really sick.
Really
Yeah.
sick. And he, at that point, made a decision to allow him to die so that he could show God's glory.
Absolutely.
Which is just a parallel to what we're asking and talking about tonight.
You see it in the questions of the sisters.
Yes. The sisters, later on, and we'll get to that later on, when Jesus finally gets there, and we see ourselves in those questions too. And when we think about sickness for the glory of God, death for the glory of God, that makes us that's uncomfortable. When you think about that from our human perspective, that's not easy to take. It's not easy to process for us. But in it doesn't disprove God like so many people use this to do. It actually proves God and his sovereignty because of what happens at the end of the story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And this wasn't, I love that John wrote this in here. Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And he wrote that in John chapter 11. Because as an outsider, we look at that and say, okay, he's about to let his friend die when he could do something about it. John, I think, had to be like, okay, guys, before you just stop reading right here, before you turn it off right here, he did love them.
Clearly, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that's another area that we have a hard time processing is God's love for us through these tragedies. And I'll let you talk about that for a second.
Well, I'll throw it into this kind of conversation. What do any of us deserve?
Death.
We deserve the justice of God.
Mm-hmm.
All of us. All of us deserve, every human being from the fall of Adam, deserve justice. But we have a misunderstanding because we say, well, God is good, therefore God is obligated to be merciful. Well, we've just redefined mercy. What is mercy by nature? Are you obligated to give mercy? It's not mercy if it's obligated. Mercy is a choice of the will that you exercise to give. The fact of the matter is that we deserve the justice of God, and this mindset that we have that God's good, so therefore he's obligated. God can remain good and still send every one of us to hell. God's not obligated out of mercy to do anything, because by nature it's not mercy. And when we talk about God's love, we have a sentimental concept of that. God's love is by his will, not his emotions. It's a verb, it's an action, and it's an action of choice. And so if Jesus allowed him to die, he's not obligated.
Not at all. And in fact, I think John, you made a good point there. I think John is trying to show he didn't know this at the time it happened, but by the time he wrote it, he knew God's love was breathtaking, so breathtaking it took his breath away on our behalf on the cross.
Absolutely.
And that's how breathtaking his love actually was.
Didn't Jesus say to Pilate, when Pilate said, "Do you not know that I have the authority to have you crucified?" And what did Jesus say?
You don't have authority.
I lay my
Myself
life
down.
I do this by my sovereign will. And so when we're dealing with questions like this, go ahead.
You know, and as John continues to talk about in John chapter 11, I hope you guys will go home tonight and read the story of Lazarus in this new way we're kind of, I think, talking about it. You know, usually it's the pinnacle is him raising Lazarus from the dead versus really talking about how it relates to tragedies in our life today. And, you know, Jesus and what he did in his actions, and by saying we're going to wait here 2 days, Jesus is really saying, I'm glad I'm not there. Which for us is scandalous. But because in his glory, he knew what was coming, or in his sovereignty, knew what was coming and the reason for it, it's not scandalous at all.
He's working for ultimate good.
Exactly. And when we talk about ultimate good, you know, one of the things you and I brought up, I don't think I brought this up with you. I brought it up talking to Dad, but was we talk about how does a good God let bad things happen? How much good, more good, does God have to do to outweigh these tragedies that happen? He's already done it. I mean, look around us every day, the breath we take, the creation around us. The good he has done for us far outweighs any tragedies that come up. But yet, the world wants to look at it on some kind of scale and compare it to an unknown.
We are performance-driven creatures. The problem is we try to live that out in a relationship with God. And aren't you glad that it's not based on performance? The only performance that mattered was Jesus' performance. I can't think of any greater travesty in human history than that a righteous man die for crimes he didn't commit.
And that God allowed it.
And that God allowed it because his sovereignty is about ultimate good.
Correct.
Is there any greater ultimate good? What do we call that day? What do we celebrate when we had communion that night? Good Friday. Why do we call it Good Friday? It wasn't good in the sense of what happened that day.
Not at all.
A righteous man died for the unrighteous? That doesn't sound good. But if I understand God's sovereignty, that God not only ordains, but he also allows. Aren't you glad he allowed Jesus to be murdered? In the moment, it didn't look good, but it is the gospel of our salvation.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't follow up to that. That's awesome. Yeah,
This
sitting
is-
over here just listening.
Well, I want you to get to some things that you've already shared with me
You
that
know,
are profoundly significant in
you know-
John 11.
John 11. So where we are now, Jesus, again, his Lazarus, he got the message Lazarus is sick. He stalled the disciples a couple of days. He says, okay, now we're going to go back and let's go see Lazarus. They don't know he's dead yet. Jesus does, but the disciples don't. And so I love the conversations, first of all, about just going back, the doubt that the disciples had. Well, if we go back, we're going to be stoned. They were scared to go back, and it's finally, I think it was Andrew, right, that said, or Nathan. Thomas, yes, right, Thomas, that finally says.
The guy we beat up.
Yeah, the guy that we beat up that finally says, hey, let's just go back with him and die with him because we're all going to die anyway. Let's just die with him.
Footnote that when you get to the end of John, that matters.
Yes, it does. And so they finally get together. They go back. And the other funny part too is he tells them he's sleeping, and they tell him, say, well, we don't want to go back because you don't want to wake somebody that's sick because rest is good for a sick person.
Right.
They need their sleep. Don't wake him up. We don't need to go back. Every excuse possible not to go back. They finally go back, and Martha's the first one that runs out and meets him on the street, and I see myself in Martha in this story. She runs out and basically says, Lazarus is dead because you're late. Blames him. You weren't here.
If you would have been here, my brother would not have died.
That's putting a lot of expectations on Jesus. And I think we do the same thing with God. If you had been here, if you had done this, if it had come out this way. And again, I think that's where we see ourselves in the stories with Martha coming up to Jesus and saying, if you had been here, why weren't you here? None of this would have happened. And basically blaming Jesus for Lazarus' death. And, I love at that point, Jesus doesn't try to argue with her. He doesn't try to reason with her. He simply says, I am the resurrection and the life. Period.
Focuses on him,
Yes.
his nature, who he is. Goes back to the issue of sovereignty. If we truly know what the Bible teaches about the character of our God, that helps us process this.
Yes. It brings hope in what we see as hopeless situations. Because those two words, resurrection and the life, ring true throughout from his time to the present and beyond, that if we truly believe who he is who he says he is, there is hope in these hopeless situations. And then he asks her a profound question, and I think we have to ask ourselves this same profound question. He turns to her at that point and says, do you believe this? And I think we have to ask ourselves the same question when tragedies like this happen. Do we really believe that he's the resurrection and the life? Do we really believe he's a sovereign God? Do we really believe he has an ultimate purpose in mind that we can't even understand? Or do we bring our emotions into it and begin to accuse and use it to walk away from the faith? It's tragedies like this and asking that question, why does God allow good things to happen, that have probably driven more people out of the faith, away from faith, than probably anything else that has ever happened.
Well, it's very easy, especially when things happen in our lives that are personal. It's pretty easy, and I don't mean that in a negative way, it's pretty easy for us to kind of be somewhat detached emotionally from the situation because it wasn't our children. It's not our community. But that doesn't mean that there won't be something like that tomorrow. It goes back to what I said, Sunday. Don't try to build a foundation when it's raining. It's important to wrestle with these issues because at some point in your life you will experience tragedy. And what you believe about God matters. It can shipwreck your faith. I'm not saying you have to understand it. When I'm talking about the sovereignty of God and that God foreknows everything and that he ordains things and that he allows things, I'm not going to tell you that I fully understand that, but I'm not really told to understand it. I'm told to trust him. And just logically, if God knows everything and God is sovereign, then he has to, by nature, allow it, or he loses his reigning, his sovereignty, his rulership. God rules even in this. It's close to us because it's Texas. it would look different if we were upon it. I'm not saying we should be insensitive or uncompassionate toward the people who are suffering at all, but what you believe about God matters, and that's the question that Jesus, I think it's the most powerful thing in the text. Do you believe? Not what you see, not what you understand, but do you believe? Do you trust me?
In the hard times, before Lazarus is raised,
Yes.
do you trust even though you're mad at
We
me?
read the end of the story.
Right, and we know, and so we dismiss it.
Yeah.
But in this time right now, when I still haven't raised Lazarus, do you still believe in me? In this time when you're mad at me because I was late,
Right.
and I wasn't there for you to assume that I wouldn't allow it to happen.
And you helped others,
Yes.
and we're supposed to be your friends.
Right. You say you love us. John says you love us.
Right.
So, exactly.
Yeah.
And-
And again, the accusations continue in the conversation. Remember the whole thing about stinking?
Right, and we'll get to that in a second, where
Okay.
Mary
I
does
keep-
it.
I keep
yeah, throwing
trying
it back. Yeah.
I mean, it's powerful. I mean, the things that he shared is powerful. Yeah.
You know, the next thing that happens to me is the most powerful. We talked about, do you believe? To me, this next is the shortest verse in the Bible. John 11:35 is the most powerful part of this story when we're trying to deal with these kind of tragedies. Jesus wept. Divine empathy. Divine empathy, not divine sympathy. Oh, you poor thing, bless your heart. No, divine empathy. He understood.
He felt it.
He felt it. It rocked him to his core.
For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was at all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. Let us come boldly to the throne of grace to receive mercy, help in the time of need.
Right.
He really feels what you feel.
Yes.
And probably to a greater degree because he's holy.
And he knows the end of the story. And he still
Yes.
took the moment to grieve with, to weep with, to understand, to come, to be God in a bod, and understanding human emotions and experiencing those with them. You know, too many times in tragedies like this, I hate this phrase, sending thoughts and prayers. You know, we hear that all the time, and it means absolutely nothing because most of the time we don't think about it after that. We say it and we don't pray for it. We need to weep when this happens because these 19 children, they were made in the image of God. If no other reason, we owe it to God to weep for them.
Having lost a child.
Yes, and please talk about that.
Well, you know, having lost a child, I mean, that probably is the hardest thing that I've ever had to deal with in my life. Not only, you know, the loss of a father shortly thereafter due to suicide, which added significant more pain to it, you know, that rocks your world. And Satan will feast upon rogue thoughts that are outside of what Scripture tells us about God. My mistake in all of that is that I didn't grieve. My faith was, I wouldn't say that my faith was shaken, it was rattled. My mistake again was not grieving. Just instead of grieving, let me just go to work. I won't have to deal with how I really feel. That was the breakdown. But I'm thankful that my parents and others were instrumental in teaching me about the nature of God because that's where the anchor was. The anchor was this, and I'll tell you even now, it's been 20 years ago, May 21st. Just a few days ago, 20 years ago. My father will be June the 1st, 20 years ago. The grief is not as edgy as it was, but it's still ever present. I still don't know why. But I am more confident than ever that good has and will come from that. Why? Because my God is sovereign. And before any of us were ever created, He was fully aware. Fully aware. And so my point is that I trust him.
You talk about anger at God. You know, we see that with Martha and Mary in the passage as well, and I think it teaches us a lesson that it's okay to be angry with God when tragedies happen. A lot of times we feel like we can't be angry with God. We can't talk to him and say, why, you know, one-on-one to be frustrated. Why didn't you? And I think, again, because Jesus says, if you see me, you see the Father, his response when Martha and Mary are very angry, the crowd's angry. In fact, we saw Martha being angry. You know, hey, you weren't here. Why were you so late? You could have stopped this. We see it in Mary because she comes out and says, you're so late. Lazarus stinks now. You waited so long. And it was basically blaming him for saying, for being late. You know, you've waited so long. You didn't show up when you were supposed to. You weren't here when you were supposed to be. I'm so mad at you because by now my brother, he stinks. He's been in the grave so long.
That's really passive aggressive.
It really is.
Instead of just coming out and going, you know, you really messed up, it's a backdoor way of saying, you let me down.
But isn't that how we approach God a lot of times, very passively aggressively?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And instead of just coming out and
I want to throw this in too real quick. There are circumstances when we talk about the sovereignty of God and we talk about human responsibility, I believe that there are times that because we are not operating on the promises of God, there are things that happen only because we are not in faith. We are not walking in faith. But there are other things that occur where, for example, if I would have known my father was going to do that Saturday morning, you know I would have intervened in some way. Prayer, grab him, take him to a doctor, whatever it would have been, but totally unaware of that. So there are things, had the parents known what was going to happen, they wouldn't have sent their kids to school. What I'm saying is there are things that I think that do occur in our lives that God allows simply because we're not walking in faith.
And it's not as a punishment. So many times people see
it's a principle.
Exactly.
It's a principle.
So many people see God as sitting in heaven on his throne with a lightning bolt ready to zap us whenever, you know, I'll show them. That's not it at all. It's a learning. It's for his glory, eventual glory in some way that we can understand.
God is committed to his glory.
Completely.
As well as he should be, and
Yes.
rightfully so. Rightfully so. So I think for us, that's why we have to walk in the Spirit. I think it's why we have to have wisdom to be able to be discerning, because I think there are many missed opportunities. It's that balance again of sovereignty and human responsibility.
You know, as we closed up on the story of Lazarus and John, you know, the crowd after he wept, after Mary and Martha accused him, you know, the crowd, if you read it, continued to blame Jesus for what had happened. And if I could summarize it without the these and nows of the King James, this is the Mike Jester translation, the paraphrase. If he could have, he would have, but since he didn't, he can't. And isn't that what the world tries to say about God through these tragedies? If he could have, he would have, but since he didn't, he can't. And I think we see that on social media yesterday and today, on the news, through our politicians. And let me close with this. He could have. He chose instead to condense eternity to the span of a single afternoon. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. The pain, the disappointment, the fear, the anger, the unanswered prayer, but finally a resolution. He condensed eternity basically into a single afternoon through this tragedy. In our entire life experience as we wrestle with the goodness of God and the pain in the world, he's condensed it all for us as well, for all generations, all mankind, so that we can live with hope. And to me, that is the story of Lazarus, of John chapter 11, that he condensed eternity into a single afternoon so that we could see hope in hopeless situations. And, you know, I'll close with this, then we'll open, I'll let you, and then we'll open up for questions. We go back to God could have eliminated evil, but he didn't. Instead, he placed it on the shoulders of Jesus, and we talked about this earlier. And I think when we begin to see it through that lens, I think we quit asking the whys, or at least it helps us understand how to process the whys.
Well, when we talk about God and God's will, we talk about the efficacious will of God and the permissive will of God. But at the end of the day, when it's difficult to discern that, again, in my mind, it goes back to, is there a maverick molecule? Think about how significant small things are, how they change the course of things. Are you familiar with Oliver Cromwell, 1600s, who basically overthrew a monarchy, brought about a systematic change, at least temporarily, a systematic change to England as it came to ordinary common people. He died after a few days' battle in his 50s. With salmonella. Changed the course of history. In our own country, on a November morning in Dallas, Texas, 1963, a bullet entered the head of the President of the United States. Changed history. God aware? Did Gabriel run up to him and go, hey, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the president's been killed? God wring his hands and say, oh my goodness, now what are we going to do? Did God allow that? If you believe that he's sovereign, you have to believe that. And if you don't believe that he's sovereign, you're an atheist. Practically, you're an atheist. You may have some good theology and some good theoretical concepts, but if you believe that anything has more control than God, you do not believe that God is who he claims to be. Nothing, no one is greater than God. But we've gotten away from that. And so we're left to our own quagmire of thought and emotion. And who would even want to worship a God who can be victimized?
And can't be explained or, yeah.
Absolutely.
But that's the kind of God I want to worship.
Absolutely.
Is one that I can't explain.
But one you can trust exclusively.
Yes.
There will be times, I promise you, there will be times in your life you will not be able to explain. And the only thing that matters in those moments, I can assure you, and I'm looking at people who have experienced that in their own lives, I can promise you the only thing that will keep you from shipwreck is your acceptance, trust in who God really is. I mean, I have to leave some things where they are. I have prayed for God's people over 35 years, and I have seen God do the miraculous. I have prayed for people, and they died. I don't believe that God failed. And I don't believe that God's promises are of no effect. If there's ever a breakdown, it's on our side. I have to trust. I have to trust.
It's hard at times.
It's very difficult at times. When you, and we've all been there. I'm looking at pretty much a crowd of people who have experienced this at one time or another. When you walk up to a grave, walk through a divorce, have to file bankruptcy, and you're believing, I can't answer all of that. But I do know this, the old Journey song, Don't Stop Believing.
Sing that now?
I can't do Steve Perry. Isn't it Steve Perry that was with Journey?
Yeah.
I can't do that. I know, for example, I got a phone call. When was that? April the 20th, 2021. I'm up here at the office. Shannon and I are up here. I get a phone call. You mind me sharing? Get a phone call. I can't understand. I don't even know it's her. She just come home from work, walks in the house, finds Robert in the floor. He's gone. Good man. Good church man. Sat right there, bent over, taking notes as fast as he could. Can't understand a word she's saying. I don't even know who it is. Hey, slow down. Who is this? He's gone. He's gone. He's gone. I'll be there in a second. What's your address? We hop in the car. We drive over across town. We pull in. I tell Shannon to stay here because I don't know what we've run into. Has he been murdered? Has he taken his life? Has he had a massive heart attack? I don't know. You stay here. Go in the house. Natural, and I want to say this too, it's natural to be out of control. It's natural to grieve. It's natural to be hysterical. It's natural to be confused. You're human. Stop being fake. You can't get it right till you know where you're at. Remember the little sticker at Six Flags that says on the map, you are here? It matters. So, sit down on the couch. I hugged you up. What'd I say? Remember your faith. Remember what you believe. And I said this word, what you believe in the light, you can believe in the dark. And I prayed over her. Did she still cry? Yes. Was she still in shock? Yes. Was she still in denial? Yes. Was she angry? Yes. Has she been processing it? Yes. Does she trust God? Yes. Look at her Facebook page. How many times on her Facebook page does she make this statement? I choose joy. I choose joy. Why? I don't understand, but I trust you. I can tell you, and you know this, your faith doesn't matter if it doesn't work on the dark days. What kind of faith do you want when everything's going well? Faith matters at all times, but it especially matters when there's a crisis because an unbelieving world is now looking. What is our testimony? Go ahead, we'll open it up.
Yeah,
maybe?
let's open up for questions. Anybody have any questions about the topic tonight?
Add something. It's just a thought that, we know that all Scripture is profitable for doctrine, reproof, correction, teaching. And if you read the Old Testament, one specific message that is so clear that is repeated over and over and over and over is that if you turn from God, bad things will happen. And a simple example is in the book of Numbers when the nation of Israel simply complained about the manna. All they did was complain about the food God's providing for them. We used to have fish and all these other neat things when we lived in Egypt, and you've brought us out here to eat manna. And God's anger burned, so he sent them quail that led to a plague that killed many of them. And you've probably heard me quote this before, that in 1980 a survey was done. I've quoted this many times. A survey was done in 1980, and people in America were asked, do you believe the Bible is a reliable source of information? Not do you believe the Bible, just do you believe it's a reliable source of information? 80% of the respondents said yes. That same survey was repeated 20 years later in 2000, and it had already dropped from 80% to 20%. Just like Tim said Monday, we're not a Christian nation. We're a nation that has turned their back on God, and that's why we see bad things like this happening now that didn't happen 30 years ago. Didn't happen when I was in school, but it's happening now because we have turned our back on God. And that's that. As I read back through the Bible now, reading through the Old Testament, I had a discussion with Tim about this. Sometimes it seems like God's being unfair. And what was your response?
I don't recall. I'm sorry.
You said it's a great demonstration of his holiness. And to me, that every time I see something like this happen, that's what I'm reminded of. You know, is the fact that if you turn your back on God, horrible things are going to happen. And it's not his fault.
No, it's not. But there's one thing throughout the Old Testament, this is what really anchors my faith, is from the Garden of Eden through the cross and beyond, he chases us regardless of what we've done against him. Look at what happened to Adam and Eve in the garden, and yet he still pursued them. Look at what happened when Israel wanted kings, and there were bad kings, and they started worshiping idols. He punished them, but he still pursued them all the way through the cross and until they ended up rejecting him at Stephen's stoning. And to this day, he still pursues us regardless of what we've done. And that's what anchors my faith.
I can give you an illustration out of my own life. I don't know how many times I told Sarah when she was a little girl, 4 or 5 years old, don't go out on the deck without your shoes on. Don't go out on the deck with your shoes. You know, make sure your shoes are on. Make sure your shoes are on. And she didn't listen. And one day she hopped out there and was playing around, and she didn't have any shoes or socks on. And in that wooden deck, she captured a splinter. Screaming, crying, upset, ran in the house. You know, she suffered the consequences of disobedience. My law for her was not for her bad, but for her good. But when she came in the house, hugged her, laid her on the bed, needed about 15 people to hold her down, her 25-pound frame, got a pair of tweezers and pulled it out. Loved her. These were the consequences. I didn't go put the splinter in her foot. This is not God saying, well, you turn your back on me, I'll make this happen. No, it's the natural consequences of turning your back on a holy God who knows what's best for you. But if America today said, we can't live without you, we embrace your son,
And I'd like to challenge you. You mentioned Christian Nation, and this is something that I want to challenge us to be better than Christian. Christian is only used 3 times in the Bible, and all 3 times it's negative. It's a slang. It's what the world calls, those Christians.
Yeah, slander.
I'd like to challenge us to take up the word disciple That's what Jesus called us to be. That's what Jesus called everyone that followed him to be. It's very well defined, unlike Christian. You can throw Christian in front of everything and run to the Bible, and it can be anything you want it to be. It's not defined.
That's why
Right.
we can't define us as a Christian nation.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
wars have been fought by Christians on both sides for,
Right.
yeah. I would like to challenge us to be disciples. Jesus in Matthew, he says, this last command, this new command I give you, and that's that you be my disciples, that you love one another as I've loved you. And he said, and people around the world, they'll know you because of that love. Not because you call yourself a Christian. In fact, we've turned Christian from a noun into an adjective. Christian music. How can music be Christian if you really think, dig into it? Christian T-shirts. We've created.
That's just all for marketing.
It is. We've created this word that means nothing. And I'd like to challenge us as a church to become disciples and be what Jesus called his followers to be. And he says, and it just this one command: love each other like I've loved you.
I want to throw this out. Make sure I hit this. I'm going to make a statement. I wrote this down in my notes to make sure that I was clear, and then I'll give a quick illustration. He knows in advance what is going to happen, and if he decrees, it shall happen. He is retaining his sovereignty over it. If something happens outside of his sovereignty, he is not sovereign. And I think outside of that, which is a profound illustration, and it's much more personal because God in a bod was there. But if you go back to, and if you're taking notes, write this down and remember it, retain it for your difficult times. It's the Genesis 50-20 principle. Remember it like that, the Genesis 50-20 principle. Jacob has died. The brothers get together and go, now we're in trouble. He is now going to pay us back. I don't know that was repentance, but at least it was an admission of guilt. And they were afraid. Oh, this will tie real well with your Jesus wept. They decide they're going to say to Joseph, before our father died, he told us to tell you, be good to your brothers. I don't see anything recorded in Scripture that conversation ever happened. But you know what? You know what Joseph's response was to that? He wept. And he said to them, what you intended for evil. In other words, not only did you do evil, but your motives were evil. Everything about this is bad. Everything about this is wrong. What you did and why you did it was evil. But what you intended for evil, God intended for good, that many would be saved. God's sovereignty has at its ultimate end good. What am I telling you? God heard the conversation of the brothers 17 years earlier and still allowed it to happen. A righteous man suffered at the hands of evil men in order to get Joseph where he needed to be to not only save his family, but the world. What's going to come out of this? I don't know. But what I do know is my God sits on the throne of the universe, sovereignly exercising his wisdom and his power over everything, even this. He can be trusted. Isn't it?
It is.
Isn't it? All right.
Any other questions? I'd like us all, why don't we end it this way? Why don't we all, we do prayers from the front. And
Right.
I'd like us to come together as a congregation.
Yeah.
Just come right down here and pray. Have you lead us in prayer. First of all, for the families in Uvalde.
Yes.
I can't even imagine what it must be like to lose an elementary age child. And just pray for that. And then secondly, pray that our faith would be strengthened through this and not shipwrecked.
Exactly. And not run from the questions.
Exactly.
I would also add this, and probably it's a matter of perspective. Pray for those who will be ministering.
Yes.
This is a tremendously heavy load. When I was a youth pastor in Sheridan, I hadn't been there for 6 months, and a kid in my youth group went home and raged and destroyed the home and took a shotgun and killed himself. A couple of days later, another student did the same thing. A few days later, a student at the high school walks in front of his class with a gun and shoots himself in front of his class. 3 teenage suicides in a matter of days. Sheridan has 3,000 people. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows everybody's business. What they don't know, they make up. Like Texarkana. There was a cloud of darkness and grief and oppression that covered that little town. People ran there, newspaper reporters, television cameras, People magazine, getting phone calls. Our pastor, I was the student pastor, our pastor got phone calls from the New York Times, from the papers in London, England, wanting to get the scoop on what had happened. Somebody's got to get up and preach those funerals. Some believers have to deliver food into that home. It's hard. That's hard. Let's pray for our brothers and sisters in Christ who live in that community, that they will be bold and faithful and full of compassion, because that town needs it. That town desperately needs that. So remember that. All right, you guys want to come up? Don't get close together. I think we generally wear deodorant, but